All right, folks. It's a little bit after the hour. I'll get us kicked off here. Welcome. This is Greater Cincinnati Grotto does a monthly technical topic in caving. This month we happen to get Howard Kalnitz, who is a renowned cartographer, who used to be part of the Cincinnati Grotto and mapped many of the caves down in the Rockcastle County, Jackson County, southeastern side of Kentucky. He did a lot of ridgewalking in the area and was able to locate a lot of caves, and has a good methodology on how to do such cave locating. He's going to talk to us a little bit about LiDAR and some of the other tools that we can use to do cave locations, and feel free to ask questions in the chat, I guess. But I will turn it over to Howard and let him introduce himself.
Hi, folks. I hope y'all can hear me. My name's Howard Kalnitz. I've been caving probably 30, 40 years. A lot of that time I spent living in Cincinnati and caving in Kentucky. That included Rockcastle, Jackson, CRF. I've also caved on expeditions throughout the world and the country. But my most favorite area was probably Rockcastle, Jackson area in eastern Kentucky. Did a lot of work down there. And I put together this slideshow or this presentation for the first time in about 2017. And this may be the third or fourth time that I've given this slideshow. It's changed quite a bit. Technology has changed. I'm better at giving presentations, and I hope you find it useful. It's not only the digital aspects of ridgewalking, but it's all of ridgewalking. What I see is the discovery of new caves kind of goes on a cycle. When people get out there and start ridgewalking, a group starts ridgewalking, all of a sudden we find lots of stuff, lots of survey projects. And then as people forget how to ridge walk or never learned how to ridge walk, then that cycle ebbs down. And so this is an effort to really open up that world of ridge walking and what it takes to find caves. And a lot of things flow from that. So without further ado, I'm going to get into it. And I'll go ahead. I've got about 60 slides. I hope to get done in just over an hour. I think this goes almost 2 hours, and we'll answer questions at the end. I will answer questions during the show. If you can kind of wait towards in between sections, I'll pause and then I'll ask for questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, any issues with seeing the slideshow? Any issues with hearing me? Okay, ridge walking. Oh, I'm pretty sure y'all can see my screen. So ridge walking, and the emphasis on finding caves and I originally wrote this for Eastern Kentucky, but it's really, I've broadened it out quite a bit, and I think most everybody in any area should get something from this. All right. Okay, ridge walking. As we get more and more interested in caving, we as people and as a community go through stages, and each one adds a little bit each time, each stage. First, we learn how to cave. And really, that's just, you become a caver, you learn how to move through a cave, you learn how not to become a statistic. And then what I see is as people get more and more interested, they start to branch out. And some people go into rescue, some people go into different areas. As I went into survey, there was a progression. So we learn how to cave, then a lot of us start learning how to survey. And you learn how to shoot, compass, set point, you become a productive part of a survey team. Then the next step I tend to see people do, they go from survey, they go to sketching. And sketching on a survey team, they learn how to draw on a cave, how to represent what they're seeing on a piece of paper. And that they tend to become the team leader of that group of surveyors. I've seen people go from sketching then to cartography outside the cave, where they're learning to draw, they're learning to draft, and they're taking all that information and cranking the data to get in the XY, the coordinates, and start drawing the maps. The next step I see is people become project leaders. So not only are you the cartographer, but now you own a cave or you own a map, you own a project. Sometimes you own a section of a cave, and you're responsible for making sure that parties get in and out. You're responsible for gathering the data, and you're pushing that completion of the project. Somewhere in there, we start to become ridge walkers, and I'll explain that throughout this slideshow. And after that, you become a renowned cartographer. Like Stephanie called me, and I could give slideshows and bore people. What is ridge walking? We tend to use ridge walking as a term to describe going out into the woods and finding caves. It's the event, sometimes we'll schedule cave trips, sometimes we'll schedule ridge walking trips. But ridge walking is really important. Oh, missed the button. When I first started caving, and this was 30, 40 years ago in Rockcastle, everybody told us, well, we found all the big caves. Well, we found Goochland. We found this cave. We found that cave. You're not going to find any more caves like that anymore. And I was told the golden age of caving, and it's over. And it's funny because it seems like every generation hears the same thing. Oh, we found all the caves, or we found all the big caves, and there's no more to be found. And that's just not true. The truth is you can't go and find huge unexplored open entrances anymore. Those are all been mostly found or mostly been told to us by the locals, but there's still a lot of caves out there. I bet there's probably anywhere from 30 to 50% of the caves, and especially in my stomping ground of Rockcastle and especially Jackson County, haven't been found yet. You have to get out there. You have to look for them. That's what ridge walking is. And ridge walking is important. It's important to the caving community. It finds the caves for the community to map and explore. And that helps get people excited. When you get up in front of a grotto and you say, hey, I've got this cave, it's going, we've been mapping it. We stopped at a certain point. There's more passage going on. We don't know what it does. People get excited. They get excited and they want to go. And that's one of those things that gel a community and gel a grotto together, is working on new cave projects. The ridge walker learns the geology and the geography of the caving area. I mean, it's really important for somebody in your group to know what's going on in our areas. This one's real important. Reaches out and make lasting contacts with landowners. Well, that's one thing a ridge walker really has to do, is know whose land you're on, get permission, and some of those relationships become very special. This is a picture with me with Fletcher Jones, who took us to all different caves and even became a friend of the grotto, showing him up at at Carstorama one year and introduced us to people. And it's those relationships that are really important that the ridge walkers can help us forge. Same thing with some of the caves like near John Henry. Bo Gurgle has been working with the same landowners who I met 10, 15 years ago, getting access into caves. We increase the knowledge of the area for the entire community. What's been caved, what's not, where are open areas to go. These are things that ridge walkers learn and can share. And also we add caves to the general knowledge. And that's important for the same reason as it is in the community for people, but also for things like the Forest Service, for landowners, and things like that. Over the last few years, I've helped find and map probably a few dozen caves. And is it luck in finding a cave? Absolutely not. I'll go out, and I used to say I could probably pretty much find a new cave every time I go out, because I took a couple of steps that I'm going to try and share with you. If you understand the caves, if you find the right areas, if you're prepared and you go out and walk, chances are great you're going to find them. And so there's a couple of basic truths that I'm going to use, and I'm going to share those with you. And I'm going to keep going. And just as an aside, here's just some of the caves that we as GCG and the community that caved down there have found in the past couple of years. I think all of these, every one of these are newer caves that we found the entrance to Ridgewalking and exploring and mapping. And there was a period of time where we just couldn't find enough people to help us with all the mapping. There's a real good story about a guy named Jacques Ramey. He was the best ridge walker I ever worked with. We always used to joke he never went into the same cave twice. He would go into a cave, find it, bring us to it, and then he lost all interest and he was off finding the next cave. So this is what awaits you. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the understanding of the process of cave formation, geology, hydrology, topography, learning where the caves form so that we know what to look for on the maps on the ground. Some of you probably know this real well, and it may be kind of a refresher. It may be a different way of looking at things, but I'm going to go ahead and share through it because that's important. Knowing how the caves form is real important, knowing how to look for them. Resources for ridge walking, all the maps and apps to help us pinpoint places to look. I have a bunch of stuff on here to share with you guys. And then getting out there and putting your feet on the ground. How do you take that in understanding? How do you take the apps? How do you take the maps? How do you get out there and get your feet on the ground? Okay. So that's kind of an intro to what we're going to be talking about. Are there any questions? Okay. The first section, finding caves, understanding the process of cave formation. There's two main truths. It's all about the water. Caves need water to form. So if we understand how water interacts with the landscape, then we start to understand where to look for caves. Basically, if we follow the water, we find the caves. It's all about the rock. 99% of our caves will only form in limestone. We need to know where the limestone is, where it's exposed, and how it's interacting with the water. Now, I will say we find caves in sandstone sometimes, caves in other parts of the country, talus caves, vulcan speleology, those are not limestone. So this is really kind of focused on those caves that form in limestone. All about the rock, it's all about the water. Learn how the rock and the water interact and you'll be successful. So I have a couple main rules with how the water interacts with the geology and the geography, the topography. I have spent a lot of time understanding drainage basins. In our area, Eastern Kentucky, 90% of the caves form within a single drainage basin. Every drainage basin floored with limestone has a cave. Multiple caves can form in a single basin. They're usually linked. Again, I'm going to say a caveat here, which is based, Rock Castle, Jackson County, very focused on this. Other areas have different rules about basins and caves. I'll get into that towards the end. Caves form in the areas between water flowing underground and water resurging. It's that simple. This is almost always in limestone. The caves lie between the impenetrable layers in the limestone. These are all basic facts, but when you start understanding them and start looking out for how these things work, that's when you're going to start to find caves. So let's get into some of the details. In our area, 90% of the caves stay within their drainage basin. A drainage basin is an area where all the precipitation that falls within that basin ultimately appears at a spring site. Springs coming out at the bottom of the cave. It's easy to determine the basins in our area. We connect all the high land around the valley and be fairly certain that all the water drains from it in a single location. So when you look at this, and this is John Griffin Cave, which many of you have probably gone to. All I did was go through and connect via a blue line all the high points around this valley, that denotes a drainage basin. And by that, what I mean is all that water that falls into that drainage basin has to come out at the bottom of that drainage basin. All the water that goes into that drainage basin, if the drainage basin is limestone, will typically go underground and then come out at a resurgence. So when we look at these, we look at drainage basins, and we know that most drainage basins, if not all of them, have caves in there. Then we start understanding, okay, what cave is in what basin? This is a real important thought for our area. It's not the same for other areas, although the whole thing about drainage basins is still very important to the cave formation. But I do want to pause and see if anybody has any questions about figuring out what a drainage basin is. Here's some other examples of drainage basins. So here's John Henry Abrams Cave. And matter of fact, this cave is much bigger than this now. This is an older picture. Again, connecting all the high points around this valley. The valley runs down the middle. All of the water that gets into that basin is going to go into that cave, and we often are looking for the main drains of those basins. Now, what I've said before also is that it doesn't mean that there's only one cave in a drainage basin, but somehow they're usually hydrologically linked together. So when you think about pits high up on a side of a valley and a main cave down below, those two are probably hydrologically connected. In other words, the water that goes into that pit is going to make its way through the connecting passages into the main drain and then drain out. So all the water that goes into that basin has to come out that resurgence somehow. You may not be able to physically pass between, say, a pit and the resurgence, but the water is passing through it. So here you see John Henry Abrams Cave. Here's Barnett Valley. Barnett Valley is the P11 drainage. The other thing you'll notice is that the bigger the drainage basin, the more water there is to form the cave. So when you start looking at these drainage basins, and you can see off to the side on this second picture, I have drawn other drainage basins off to that side. Those are smaller. They're going to have less water. They're probably going to form smaller caves. So when I'm out ridge walking, one of the things I'll look for is a drainage basin that's large, because we know it's capturing a lot of water. Now, if you know about the Barnett Valley, there's probably a dozen different caves in there, but there's only one main resurgence, which means all of that water eventually does get into that main drain and come out that resurgence. Okay. 90% of the caves stay within their drainage basins, question mark. It's not true for other parts of Kentucky and the country. In areas where the limestone is thick and underlies surface valleys, the surface topography does not constrain the caves. So, and I'll get into this with a little bit more detail, but if there's a lot of limestone underneath the valley floor, and there's a lot of limestone underneath the ridges, then the caves can form between those surface drainages. And so here is a picture of Mammoth Cave. And what Mammoth Cave is showing is there are lots of drainage basins, dozens, I think, of drainage basins in the Mammoth Cave area. It's still very important to how the caves form. One drainage basin passes its water to another drainage basin underneath, and that's how the cave grows in incredible amounts of length. This is the same thing like in Tag. There's a lot of areas where the caves pass under drainage basins. There are a few examples of caves passing under drainage basins or between drainage basins in Rockcastle and Jackson County, not very many. So when we start looking for caves, we're going to bet on the 90%, which is every drainage basin has an independent cave. When you're walking these other areas, you can still use those same kind of thoughts. It's all about the rock, it's all about the water, but you have to learn how that surface drainage links with the subsurface waterways. And once you understand that, that gives you a clue on how you're ridge walking in those areas. Okay, I've said this. Every drainage has a cave. This is a little idiomatic, but every drainage has a cave, whether or not it's been found, whether or not it's big enough to get into, whether or not it has an entrance. Every valley that runs through limestone and loses its water has a cave. All right, this is real important. Two things. One, every drainage has a cave. Two, you may not be able to get into it. It may be too small. It may be collapsed. There may be more than a few reasons why you're not getting into that cave, but it's there. And a while ago, Art Palmer put out a famous graph showing the number of entrances per caves, and it was kind of a curve. And it predicted, there's 100 caves with 50 entrances. There's 1,000 caves with 10 entrances. There's 100,000 caves with one entrance, and that predicts, 1,000,000 caves with no entrances. I'm not sure that's true, but not all caves are enterable. Okay, so also something I already mentioned, some could have more than one, a few pits where the water sinks and the main trunk gathers it in resurgences. So as I did work in Rockcastle County, one of the things I did do was sit down and start to sketch out all the drainage basins. And you can see here on Crooked Creek, all these drainage basins, which I had numbered and was looking for caves. So several of these drainage basins don't have known caves in them or don't have known main trunks where the water is flowing. And that's where I set some of my sites. Now, this is older information. Some of these have been found. So over here is on your right is Crooked Creek. On your left is Horselick Cemetery, two areas that I work at, two different drainages. And I would go out and I would identify drainages that I didn't think had a main drain and go push those. And some of those we found. Horselick we found, Horselick Hell we found, rain shelter drainage we found, Spivey. These are all caves that were found based on the fact that we knew that these drainages didn't have a known cave and we were going to go out and find them. Spivey was a huge gaping entrance that nobody had been to in many, many years. Okay. So we talked about water and water drainages. I'm going to talk about rock layers for a little bit. Caves are formed where water is flowing underground between an insurgence and a resurgence. This sounds obvious, right? We all know this. This is a cross section of the limestone in Rockcastle and Jackson counties. This is pulled right from the geotopo. In Rockcastle, we have a bed of limestone between 50 and 150 feet thick. In geotopo maps, this is designated by the markings MNL, MNG, MNU. Okay. MN, I think, is the designation for limestone. I'll have to go back and remember that. Those are important. Above the limestone is the Pennington, which is a shale and sandstone, impenetrable. It's designated with MP or PL. Below it is the Borden Formation, also non-cave supporting, designated with MBNA. And those designations change because they like to change the rock names all the time. All caves have to form in the limestone between those two non-cave forming layers. You will find sandstone caves sometimes. We find them right at that intersection between the Pennington and the limestone where the caves have broken up in the sandstone, but they're usually based on the limestone below it. So this is important. It sounds obvious that all the caves are between the Pennington and the Borden in our area. In different areas, The impenetrable rock layers have different names. Okay. You can go and understand the rock layers in your area using the stratigraphic column. Okay. The stratigraphic columns give information about the types of rocks as well as the thicknesses. So what we used to call the Newman limestone has now started being called the Slade Formation, and things have changed. That's okay. They're still limestones. And this is what I was showing you on the other map. Pennington on the top, the MNU, MNG, MNL, the Newman limestones, and then that Borden Formation underneath it. And this is two different stratigraphic columns. The one on the left is the original from the topographic maps. I think it dates back to the 50s and 60s. And then all of them got renamed into the Borden, Slade, and Paragon, I think in the 80s or 90s. But the names change. What's important is the order, the color. So when you look at the geotopo maps, and here's a geotopo map. And this is what we lived by when I first started caving, was these paper geotopo maps. They were so valuable to us. But what it does is it really calls out the limestone. On the geotopo map, we can see the Pennington on the top, the limestones in the middle, and the Borden on the bottom. In here, the Pennington's marked PL. It's kind of a light blue. Then we have all these different purples and a little bit of green that are all the limestones. And then the Borden is, forgive me, I think the Borden's MNU, MNG. I think the Borden's green or brown. I think that's marked a little bit wrong. Okay, and then you have the Borden. Okay. So all cave generation is in the middle. So we often walk that upper boundary, finding water flowing off the Pennington where it can't sink. It hits that limestone and sinks right into it. So we always walk that border. That's why it's so important to know where the limestones are and using the geology geotopo maps. Or we walk the bottom where the water comes out of the limestone and back onto the Borden. Again, it can't flow underground. So we look between those two areas. We have two avenues of ridge walking, high up and low down. And here's examples of caves forming at limestone boundaries. The first one on the left, that's John Henry. And you can see as soon as the cave hits that Borden formation, it flows out from underground. That's its resurgence. In the middle, we see pits. We see pits as soon as the water flows off of the Pennington and into the limestone. Okay. And then here on the right, we see pits where the water flows off the Pennington, goes into limestone, and then comes back out on the Borden. And so you can see caves form at boundaries, not always, not 100% of the time, but if you're going to go out and walk, you walk those boundaries. Here's something I put together in 2016 when I was working Upper Horse Lick area. Okay. Some of you who have worked with me might recognize this. This was me putting all of these together. So here you see the groundwater basins. You see the topographic lines. And here I've kind of simplified it by just coloring the carbonate, the limestone rock, blue, and then the non-carbonate rock, brown. So again, the supposition is your caves are going to form in the drainage basin between the upper impenetrable layer and the lower impenetrable layer. In at least two of these, you see caves. One of those is John Henry Abrams, and then an upper feeder to it, Polly Witt, and down is Johnson Creek Cave, I believe. Again, forming. Now, I can make an educated guess and infer where the water is going to flow. That's the green line. It's going to come in to the limestone at the top interface and flow somewhere out at the lower interface. We've also marked here some of the springs. Springs are resurgences. Sometimes springs you can get into them, sometimes you can't. But this brings everything together into understanding where we're going to look for caves. Check the drainage basins, look for the drainage basins that don't have big caves. check those interfaces at the top, check the resurgences at the bottom. Okay. This was a lot of stuff I threw at you relatively quickly. Any questions about this? And I'm willing to take any questions at all.
Where would you get a geotopo map? Or where are those available?
Hang on to that question. If I haven't answered it by the end of this presentation, get back to me. But that's a big part of the next section.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay. Finding caves, the resources. Where do I find the maps? Excellent lead-in question. Maps, maps, maps. I find them the most important resources. They help you decide where to go, help you when you get there, and then help you pinpoint the information of what you found. Kentucky has a great wealth of information. I'll probably say this 2 or 3 times. I'm always amazed about the amount of information Kentucky has for its geology. I guess partially because it's such a cold state, but there's a lot there. Okay, so there's a couple of maps that we use. Historic topo maps. Okay, again, paper topo maps. A lot of us have copies of these. I have them sitting right next to me. We have copies of these stashed away with points all over them. They can be downloaded now. So we're going to talk about downloading maps quite a bit. I'm not going to go into the details, but this site, which is the USGS Maps Topo View, allows you to download old paper maps. You can download the whole thing. Now, how useful is a downloaded map? I'll get to that in a second. If you still want a paper map, either a paper geotopo or a regular topo, they are still sometimes available from the USGS. To what degree they're still printing them, I don't know. Some states no longer print their geotopos or their topo maps at all anymore. However, they're all available online. What I would recommend, I'm going to talk to Stephanie about, putting this presentation out there. So there's a link out there. You can screenshot this. There is a slide at the end of the presentation that has all the resources, links, and I would say screenshot that when we get to that. Okay. Nowadays, we use digital topo maps. They're greatly updated with layers. There's a ton more information on a digital topo map than there were on the old paper maps. They're PDF forms, and they have a bunch of layers that you can turn on and off. So you can turn on and off the topo lines. You can turn on and off the roads, depending on what you're looking for. I use topo maps a lot for knowing where things are. We use geotopos for understanding the rock layers, but sometimes it's hard to understand where the roads are, how to get there, what's the best way, where the houses are. Regular topos are good for that kind of information. And they even have satellite photos on these maps, and they are updated probably on a 2 or 3 year basis, as opposed to like once every 10 years on the paper maps. So digital, you can get these digitally. Current topo maps can be downloaded from USGS Map Store. You go to the National Map Index and you'll download these. So National Map has US topos on it. And like I said, they're all free. You can download as many as you want. Geotopo maps. Again, really valuable for deciding where to walk, tell you the elevation of the layers of the rocks. They have a ton of extra geology around the collar on the map. They were priceless and hard to find 20 years ago. Nowadays, they're all downloadable, and you can download them. And I think they come in PDF form or JPEG forms. you can see this down on the lower right is part, I think, of Rockcastle County, showing which each map is. And all you have to do is click on it and download it. It's that easy. We used to fight for them. I still believe that they have all of the extraneous information. So when you look at this map in the upper left, not only does it have the geotopo, it's got the stratigraphy, it's got descriptions of the rocks, it's got the colors, it's got cross sections. So it is valuable to download the whole thing, even though you might only want to use the geotopo itself. Okay, other resources, Forest Service maps. They're essentially the same as topos, but they show Forest Service lands. So if you want to know if you're walking on Forest Service lands, sometimes it's just a lot easier to walk on Forest Service land because you don't have to go find the owner. You know who it is. That's valuable for Daniel Boone National Forest, for example. Shows you who owns what property. There's a lot of in-holdings in the forest in Daniel Boone National Forest, so you know whether or not you're on Forest Service land. I won't talk to permissions of walking on Forest Service lands at all. There's the download for that. Those can be downloaded through the Forest Service itself. Now LiDAR. When I first put this presentation together in 2017, LiDAR wasn't there. I think they started shooting LiDAR, during those years, but they didn't release Rockcastle and Jackson County till I think 2018 or 2019. I can't remember. They released it on the last week of December, and in January, we went out and found this cave right here. And I think Matt was on me on that Ridgewalking trip, and we literally named it, it's the LiDAR Bitches Cave, because we were so impressed with what LiDAR did for us. It's revolutionized and will revolutionize the search for caves in Kentucky Cumberland Plateau. I'll speak a little bit towards the end in other states. The quality of LiDAR available to us is an indispensable resources. Like I said, within days of becoming available, we found several new unrecorded entrances in areas I've been working for years and areas where I walked 100 feet away and then went back and found a cave because it showed up on LiDAR. Okay. What is LiDAR? A lot of people talk about it, but 5 minutes. LiDAR shoots pulses from a flying platform. The LiDAR we use, sometimes called last return LiDAR. So you shoot down and you'll get a return from branches and trees and other different things that bounce it back. But when you use last return, it's giving you the surface of the earth. So it negates anything like trees and mostly even houses and buildings, but returns very good ground level information. And Kentucky has gone from like 5 feet to 2 feet resolution. And there's certain areas now that have 6-inch resolution in LiDAR. It takes time for them to shoot it. They do have to haul it around with an airplane. It's not satellite. So I think 6-inch, you'll wait quite a bit to get 6-inch in the rural areas where we ridge walk. They tend to do 6-inch around cities. Okay. Using LiDAR can be challenging. There's a lot of computer processing. There's a lot of tile work. You have to put together tiles. LiDAR is really physically a string of a bunch of numbers denoting elevation. So something has to turn it into a picture that we can use. And there's several different programs that do that. Some of it's difficult. And for a while, a lot of us didn't know exactly how to even use LiDAR. But probably about 2020, 2019, I generated an application using ArcGIS to generate a LiDAR reader for the state, and it's open to everyone. It does not have cave locations, but it's hugely useful. Okay, not only does it have the LiDAR, but because Kentucky is pretty much progressive state, the Geologic Survey, they put all of their data in a format that I can put into this application. So there's a lot of different layers in here to make it even more helpful for ridge walking. I recently updated the app to use 2-foot LiDAR instead of the original 5-foot. We get better look at smaller features on the ground. And you can see the difference on the lower two pictures. The left is 5-foot and the right is 2-foot. Again, lucky to cave in the state has great LiDAR resources. It's not the case in all states. Kentucky has continuously updated. Some of the states even have 6-inch, talked about that already. But you can see the image on the right, a little bit clearer than the left. It's a picture of a pit. A little bit more about this app. In the layers menu, you'll find several tools for ridge walking. Here's one that literally shows a copy of the old paper geotopos. So if you go to this app, and of course you'll get the link for it. If you go to this app, you can turn the quad maps on and off. And I'm going to give you an example of how to use that in a little bit. The colors and the designations are the same. See, it says MNU. Because they're copies of old maps, they're not even the new rock layer designations. They're still the old designations that some of us grew up with. Here is geology linked on here. That circle's a little bit high. It's supposed to circle the KY geo. So you can actually show the rock layers. So it's the same thing as that paper geotopo, but it's digitally formatted. And then you can kind of make it transparent so the LiDAR shading shows up. So now not only do you see what the ground looks like, but you know where the rock layers are. And I also did it where only the Slade limestone. So the geo shows all the different rock layers. This layer on the app shows only the Slade limestone. And that's important. Remember, we talked about those interactions between limestone and then above that, the Pennington. And we look at the interface and here you see a pit right on that interface between an unknown upper rock layer, probably Pennington, and the limestone. And this is what we talk about by walking the interfaces. Okay, it can also show imagery. I don't find imagery to be hugely useful. Sometimes you'll look at something on a LiDAR and you'll go, what the hell is that? Is that a pond? Is it a pit? Is it a sinkhole? Is it a building? And you'll open up the photography and look at it and say, oh, okay, it's a building or a pond. Sometimes useful, not hugely. But it can also show karst potential maps. And this is something that KGS says, okay, here are areas where there's likely to be karst. Is that useful? Sometimes. Okay, this is the app. Screenshot this if you want, take a picture with your phone. This may be the most single important slide of the entire show. You put this in, it'll go right to it, and it'll show all those layers. So I'm going to leave this here for a second while y'all scramble around, get your phones. I have it on the list at the end as well. All right. Okay. Here's an example. Oh, I take that back. But wait, I'll do the example later. So the app that I built, I call it KY DEM and Geotopo. DEM is digital elevation model. It's another term for LiDAR. You can take that app and open it on your cell phone as well. It's called ArcGIS Field Maps, and it's an app that's available through the Apple App Store. That's where I found it. It's free. And then you put in that name, KY DEM and Geotopo. Okay. And you open it up, and it'll open up just like you see on that left hand on your screen. But you have to have good cell phone coverage to make it work well. And we'll talk about using the resources in a second, but there's one reason I print out maps and register locations before heading in the field, because in several places, hard to get cell phone coverage. And out here, out west, almost, you run out of cell phone coverage almost immediately. So this is a great app for you to use if you have good coverage. Other resources. Again, Kentucky has a lot of data. So one karst resource is, there's a whole page just on karst and karst resources on the KGS server. A lot of information there, a lot of things to use, worth going to visit. There's its link. I'll have it in the list at the end. One of the resources, groundwater quads. So this is a mapped karst groundwater basin. And what it shows is potential or inferred paths of water flow underground. So Poplar Gap, we know that there's a huge cave under Poplar Gap. We haven't found the main drain yet. What they'll say is they've done dye tracing. They trace where water goes underground. They trace where it goes, resurges via dye traces, and they will mark inferred paths due to dye traces. And you can understand that these will have caves under them. Some have been found, like you can see one says Mullins Cave, pretty obvious. They found that cave. Horselick Creek, we found some of those caves. There are lots of areas, if you look at this map, where there are dye traces where we've not found the cave yet. Another, you put it together, say, hey, they found a dye trace there. Let's go look at the geology. Let's look at the drainage basins. Let's go ridgewalking. Other resources. This is a great resource that people don't know about. Groundwater info. They have digitized, Kentucky has digitized its spring data, and springs are what? They're resurgences. Springs are resurgences. Whether or not you can get in them is a different question, but you can go through these, and they will tell you whether or not, and this is not easy enough to see, but they'll tell you whether or not it's open, whether it's a cave, whether it's got passage. And I've used these to locate several caves. So in the Kentucky Geological Survey, groundwater information, water well and spring records and spring locations. And here's a map of all the spring locations on here. This is the Kentucky Geological Survey geologic map information. So they have a map server that has a ton of information on it. And it has for the caver, it shows different limestones, it shows sinkholes, it shows a bunch of different information. It's kind of a little bit general and broad and not precise. Good information for the entire state. Okay. Here's what it looks like when you zoom in. Not only will that map server show you where the limestone is, but it'll also outline potential sinkholes. Sinkholes are always an indicator where the water goes underground. We don't always see them in the topos, and this program actually goes through and they wrote a program to outline all the depressions. So it's very worthwhile understanding if there's a big valley with a big sink in it, no cave, the water's going underground there. Okay, other resources. KSS. KSS is a group run by cavers, has a database of all caves known in Kentucky. Of course, locations as well as maps and survey data, reports and stories. I admit to being an ex-president of KSS. It's got a lot of information. It's got over 5,000 caves in Kentucky. And you see the map showing the rough locations of all those caves. Jackson Rockcastle, I think Rockcastle is the second most cave populated county. KSS will not release bulk data, but will release data from the county coordinators, whether or not they're county coordinators anymore, they will release, if you are a caver and you are ridge walking and you want information about the area you are ridge walking, if you tell them that area, they will release the data. I will do that. You just have to make an application. Um, do not write KSS and ask for every cave in Wayne County, every cave in Jackson County. We won't give that type of bulk information out. But if you are, can you, if you can narrow your information down to a specific quad or quads, then we're happy to, is hopefully you'll give us that data back that you find. And I dare say that's probably the same for every other speleological survey. Other resources, again, in Kentucky. I know I'm throwing a lot of resources at you. Kentucky from Above. This has a bunch of LiDAR and imagery sources. A great site, especially for people who know how to use ArcGIS. Okay, that's the resources. That's it. I threw a lot of resources at you. I'm going to show you how to kind of use those resources and put it all together. But let me pause here and see if anybody has a question about the resources. Okay. All right, finding caves. You can't get around putting feet on the ground. Ground truthing, whatever you want to call it, ridge walking, get out there and do it. How do you do it? How do you take the information about the caves I gave you in the first section, the resources I gave you in the second section, and put it together? How do you find the caves? Okay, number one, talked about this. Learn the geology, hydrology, and topography. Pick an area to walk. Don't just drive down to Rock Castle and say, I'm on a ridge walk today. Work ahead of time to identify certain areas that you think might have a cave. Use some of the resources that I've given you, play on the computer, do a bunch of work ahead of time. Find out as much as possible. Check all the resources. Use what you've seen to learn the topography, hydrology, geology. Check maps to see how likely a cave is there. Here's some important things. Talk to other cavers. You know, some of us have been around. Some of us have areas that we wish we got to, never gotten to. Some of us know of caves that other people don't know of and say, oh, no, that's been found. Ask for data from KSS and don't overestimate what you can do. A 5 or 6 mile day going up and down hillsides is a lot. You know, I usually will pick 1 or 2 drainage and stick to that in a trip. And that way you're pretty sure that you're going to hit the entire area. Here's an example of using the LiDAR. And this is using the app that I shared with you, the KY, DEM, and Geo LiDAR app. Okay. So what I do, I'll do it different ways. Sometimes I'll look at a certain area because I've got an idea about it. I've driven through. Sometimes I just cruise around the LiDAR till I find pits. It's that simple. And I literally started looking around for an example I could use and just kind of cruised. This is kind of up near Renfro Valley. Okay. And I know that there's a lot of stuff up there that people have never really looked hard at. So I went around and just kind of cruised in until I found this area. And look at this area. It has 2 possible insurgences. And follow with me. You can see how a stream starts, goes around a bend, and then disappears. And then the stream is gone. There's no surface. There's another possible stream down, you know, in the middle left. It goes for a while and then disappears. That looks like an insurgence to me. That looks like water was running and then all of a sudden went underground. And then here we see what is typical examples of pits. Round depressions higher up in the hillside. And then the other thing that we see is a possible resurgence where all of a sudden the stream just kind of starts at the bottom of the valley or the valley head. So I just randomly found this using LiDAR in my app and cruising through. Totally random. However, it kind of looks interesting. I will tell you, I did go to KSS's database because I have access to it and look to see if there was a known cave here, and there is not. The closest known cave to this is Sheriff's Pit, probably about a half mile to the west. Okay, so after I find a LiDAR hit, I'll start swapping in some of those other layers, just looking at it. And what you'll see is the limestone, the last layer of limestone here is this green layer right here. And you can see how between the green or the upper layer, it may be this blue layer, I'm not exactly sure which layer, but you can start to see at this elevation, there's a whole line of pits, And you can see that this is sinking into limestone. It's important that it has to sink into limestone. So you swap in and out and start looking at the rock layers and make sure the rock layers agree with what you think you're seeing in LiDAR. There are ponds, there are house foundations that can fool you. They look like pits, they look like insurgences, dug quarry pits, all of these things. So that's why it's important to look at the limestone, maybe at the pictures. Then I swap in the geotopo and I confirm, yes, there's a lot, right up in here. This is about where somewhere in this area is right where the Pennington is, and that this whole bottom of this whole valley is limestone. And then it resurges down, then I got the Borden down below. So that confirms what I think I know. But there's one interesting thing in here that I never would have caught if I hadn't opened up at least the geotopo. I wouldn't have noticed it on the LiDAR alone. And that the middle, and this is the regular topo, shows very clearly it's a sinkhole. And so all of these things start adding up is there's a cave under there. It's a totally random location I found scanning around for the purpose of presentation, but if I was living in Rockcastle or living in Cincinnati, I'd probably go down and check it out. Then what I'll do is I'll use the measure feature, which is under one of the banners to the left. I'll pick up the GPS location. And then, like I said, the geotopo is hard to read. I'll turn on the regular topo and kind of look at the location. And this is probably the only spot in this presentation that has maybe sensitive information, because here's a possible cave location. That's where it is. And like I said, we discovered a bunch of caves, Sheriff Pit, and a few other things up here. This area near Renfro Valley has not been worked very much. Okay. So that's how I use that. So step number one, do a bunch of research at home, find an area, then bringing the info out with you. Okay, print out and assemble maps. I personally print up sections of maps and put them in sleeves in a binder. Okay, home printed maps are as good as better than bought, and you can blow certain areas up. So somebody asked, where do you get the geotopos? I don't anymore. I download them. I'll get certain sections. I'll print them out. Sometimes I blow them up. I'll maybe do one map of the entire county and blow up certain sections, and I throw them in a binder. And that way I had a binder for each topo. Livingston, Sand Gap, all the different Jonetta, all the different areas I was Ridgewalking. I just put together a binder and blow up certain areas. The only thing you have to be careful of is if they get wet, they rain. If you get wet, they will run. And I have several examples of maps that got wet. If I just throw them in a plastic binder and throw them in my day pack. And this is what I carry with me. I usually take a paper geotopo, if I have them, a paper topo, and a printout of the LiDAR. So I'll print out the geotopo, I'll print out the regular topo if I don't have the full-size ones, and then I'll print out the LiDAR. And then to make it easy, and you can see right here where I've done this, is I've actually written down GPS locations, because at least back then I didn't have a better way of bringing the information with me. So I wanted to make sure I didn't just have the map, that I also had a GPS location that I could walk to. And you can see my printer ran out of ink. but it worked just fine. And this is near Teamers. And so I think Matt and I went out and we had a couple caves we wanted to locate, plus a couple of possible hits and sinks that we spent the day looking for. Okay. Nowadays, you can also bring a cheap computer. I started using a Surface 3, and you can get a Surface 3 for $100, and you can download all your notes onto it. It can hold a lot, but it actually takes more time in the field. You have to get it out, you have to start it, you have to make sure you got the battery, it has to load the maps. And I'll tell you, don't bring something you can't lose. It can get dropped, soak damage. And I always worried about it getting stolen. So you want to bring something cheap. Don't bring an expensive computer. Cell phones. Cell phones have the added benefit of being able to track your location. In other words, pinpoint where you are on a map. Make sure you have every map downloaded into your unit before you leave. So ArcGIS field maps, Garmin EarthMate will work, GPS, and Avenza maps. Avenza maps I use a lot because if you're proficient with ArcGIS, you can create a PDF map, download it into Avenza, and follow along. And this is just an example that when I'm out doing bushwhacking for ruins, I do that a lot in Bears Ears now. I want to go find a specific Indian ruin. There's no trails out there, and I'll create a map and download it onto Avenza, and then it'll track exactly where I am via the app. Okay, what else do you need to do? Get permission to walk. This is what I'll tell you is try and figure out who owns the property, try and get permission. That's the best way I can put it. Forest Service, you don't need permission to walk. When you find permission for a cave, 75, let me off the top of my head, 25% of the time, somebody's going to run you off with a shotgun. Okay. If you tried to walk without getting permission, you might have ended up getting shot. So ask. 50% of the time, people have no problem. Another 25% of the time, you find somebody who is a great resource, becomes a friend, takes you to caves, introduces you to people. So what I'll say is try and get permission to walk. And I almost always use a GPS, whether or not you use your cell phone, whether or not you carry a standalone GPS, any GPS will do. Gear, don't overpack. This is the one thing I see people, everybody brings their caving gear. You bring all your gear, you're going to find one little crap hole and you're going to spend the next 4 hours trying to dig it open, where right around the corner is a bigger cave. So don't plan on going caving when you're ridge walking. Bring just enough to determine whether or not it's a cave. Helmet with light, knee pads, and a jacket. Okay. That's enough to see what it does, but not enough to spend in a crappy little thing all day. Food and water, blaze orange and hunting season, don't want to get shot. And FRS radios are invaluable. Talk about that more in a second. And then go. Get a group. The more people you have, the more ground you can cover. 4 to 6 is perfect. Spread out in an elevation. Okay, so what you do, I'll detail this a little bit, you find that elevation between the Pennington and the limestone, somewhere about 1,000 feet, could be 1,400 feet, could be 800 feet, depending on where you are in Rockcastle. Spread 4 people, 6 people wide up and down the hill. You don't want to be next to each other. You don't want to see each other, but you want to be close enough to yell to each other. And it's best if you can go from the intersection to down to the resurgence or the floor, and a few radios, because somebody who's going to walk off and you're not going to know where they are, and you're going to have to call them back. You pick that elevation, you pick the high elevation, usually the limestone and the Pennington, and you walk that. And like I said, down here in this map, you can see the Pennington and the limestone right below it. It's right around 1,100 feet. That's where you're going to be walking. You're going to range up and below. Remember, these maps are inferred. The true elevation of those rock layers can be up or down 50 feet. We walk at one side of the valley, stay high, sweep around, pay attention to the axis of the valley, then come back, drop down to the exit, see if you can find any resurgences, and record all locations, spring and major sinks with a camera if possible. If you don't record them and then keep notes, you're going to forget. And when you get back, record your finds. Use a program like Google Earth, which is free. Put locations on the map so you can understand the geography that you just wrote. Write trip reports, fill out a KSS data, and map that cave. So I showed you, what I brought when we went to go down into the Teamers area, and here's the result of one day. We corrected Teamers location, moved the entire cave survey. We verified 2 caves, Humongous and Tank. We rediscovered 1 cave, High on the Hill. And we had 1 new cave, Matt's new cave, and then 1 karst feature. That's just one day. So very, very easy. Qualifying cave locations, finding new caves. This is what I came back with on that one day. That's it. What I'm going to do next, this is all of those resources. Hang on for just a second. I have resources for Indiana and Tennessee as well. Let me go back to this and leave this up on the screen for a bit. Take a picture of this, screenshot it, do what you want. Meanwhile, I'll take any questions, and I'm going to look at the chat. I've been too busy to even look at the chat. So, okay. All right. I'll take questions.
How difficult is it to make your own ArcGIS? How'd you go about learning that?
ArcGIS is not the simplest program in the world. But there's lots of lessons. Esri, who makes ArcGIS, is a leader in the business because for $100 a year, if you're using the program for a nonprofit, they will give you all of the resources. So for $100 a year, you get ArcGIS, you get ArcGIS Online, you get all of their lessons online and things like that. And that helps you start generating maps. What the second part of why ArcGIS is so powerful is states like Kentucky will host map information. And all you do is link your ArcGIS map to their map. And whenever they make updates, it automatically occurs on your in your maps. And those are very easy to find and link together. And all of the app that I generated does is go out and tag Kentucky's apps. And so they're always updated. So ArcGIS is not that simple. It's worth learning if you're serious about geology, geography, cartography. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Yeah, and I've seen somebody QGIS, and I believe, and I'm not sure, QGIS may be free. It's not quite the depth of ArcGIS. I've used both of them, and they're very similar, and they have very similar outputs for us uneducated or not depth. People use ArcGIS for planning cities and roads and things like that, and we're just looking at geology, geography, topography. We don't nearly use all of the things that ArcGIS needs. So QGIS, I think, is one of the free GIS programs. Okay. I'm going to flip over to the Indiana, Tennessee resources. People can, now I will say I'm real familiar with the Kentucky. I not nearly as in-depth knowledge of Indiana or Tennessee. I didn't go much further afield than that, but I'm sure Alabama, Georgia, most states now have LiDAR data, that whatever LiDAR they are shooting, and other maps and GIS data. Yeah. So and so I see some of you from Tennessee, and the Tennessee Cave Survey, of course, is an excellent resource. KSS is a closed survey. In other words, we don't give out data. That's the way we formed it. Tennessee is open. Once you join, then you'll get all of the cave locations. Now, what does that mean to ridge walkers? Well, I'm not going to spend all my time going in the known caves, but what knowing where the caves are will help you go ridge walk in areas where the caves are not. And I also know somebody else saying that QGIS is free. All right. What else? What other questions do people have? Close up this.
Well, if there's no other questions, I just want to say thank you, Howard, for putting this together and sharing a lot of really good information with us. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do a presentation and teach the next generation of people how to find the caves.
Oh, no worries. What's on screen right now, if anybody wants to stay, I can demonstrate some of the CAIDEM and Geotopo things live, if anybody wants to see
That's
that.
great. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Okay, so this is the CAIDEM and Geotopo. Now, I'd love for somebody from Indiana to put one together for Indiana. They're free. Everybody can use them. I'd love for somebody to do it for Tennessee. Maybe they'll do it. This is the link, CACA Maps, ArcGIS. CACA stands for Kalnitz Cartography. But what you see here is the legend. Maybe not that important. I'm going to skip that for now. But here are the layers. These are all the different layers that you can turn on and off. This is aerial photography. And because this is live, there's typically a delay. Aerial geography, if it knows who owns the surface, and this is where the legend comes into Forest Service land, non-Forest Service land. Okay. Those paper maps that we talked about now in digital form, you can even see where the linkages are. These show, again, the limestones and also faults. Faults don't mean too much to us in Eastern Kentucky, but in other areas mean a whole lot. This is the actual LiDAR layer. This is the 5-foot layer, so I have the 2-foot and the 5-foot. Right now I have the Kentucky Geo on. You turn that off. Zoom in. And you can see the difference between the 5 and the 2. Slade shows only the limestone. This is the Kentucky karst, so this is generated, so it's showing only the limestone, but it's showing other information as well, such as faults. data tiles. This actually shows, I have to go back and pick up the numbers. These numbers right here are information about each tile. And so if somebody needs to download a specific aerial photography, geotope, or things like that, you have to refer back to those numbers. And then here's the entire geology, and then the Karst Lake Pond. And like I said, this should be available and open to anybody. There should be no issue getting into it. Every now and then, Kentucky will change the title or location of some of their layers, and I have to go back and fix them. And usually somebody calls me up and says, your damn app ain't working no more. And I go back in and figure out what Kentucky changed. Measure, it's got like areas and perimeters, but the most important one here is lat long to tell you exactly where you are. And then print. And this should cover the entire state. And that, I think, is the geology mostly shown up there. And I believe that's it. Unless there are any more questions, I'll stay on for a little while longer. Y'all, thank you for attending. Get out there, find more caves, survey them, get people involved, get your grottos involved, turn the data into KSS or TSS or ICS or whoever you're a member of. Thank you, everybody.